Cowboy Bebop is an anime that's as incredible as it is misunderstood. But before we get into that, let's first talk about the series itself. Cowboy Bebop is a genre-bending masterpiece, which focuses on subtle depictions of loneliness, loss of purpose, and depression. While there's some overarching plots, it mostly follows an episodic format, in which a group of outcasted lost souls in a futuristic dystopian space setting are chasing after some bounty. Basically, it's more about the characters than the plot. And each of these characters suffer from some sort of abandonment and emotional baggage that holds them down. Or, as the title card of the show says, they're carrying that weight. And I'm just gonna run down the list of each of these characters' weights just so you have an idea. Spike left a criminal organization, but he was unable to start a new life with his soulmate. This caused him to feel a constant state of emptiness. On the other hand, Faye survived a tragic accident that would take the lives of her loved ones, only to awaken decades later in a world where she knew nothing about herself or the world at large, into a pile of debt, and was betrayed by the man who promised to help her through this tragic situation. Additionally, Jet had the woman he loved walk out of his life without an explanation or even a warning. He was also betrayed by a corrupt police force, which ultimately forced him out of the profession. Even smaller comedic relief characters like Ein and Ed had their own sort of weight, as Ein was a stray dog and Ed was abandoned by her father. While all of these characters have individual weights, it's interesting to see how they play off of each other's. For instance, Jet gets really upset when Spike or Faye leave the Bebop unannounced. This is probably a result of the woman of his life walking out on him. Spike and Faye are also interesting foils to each other, as Spike wants to move on from the past, but is unable to, whereas Faye wants to go back to the past, but she's unable to. They even briefly talk about this.
I may never know anything about my past.
Doesn't really matter, does it?
Easy for you to say, at least you have a past.
And you have a future.
There's also subtle nuances from each of their characterizations, which likely stem from their weight of the past. For instance, Spike's nonchalant demeanor is more of a result of him being apathetic to the world at large, rather than him just being naturally cool. In addition, Faye's gambling addiction is due to her immense debts that she racked up and a desperate attempt to free herself from the burden of her financial shackles. But let's get back to my original point. I said this show was misunderstood. Why? Well, many fans of the series often imply that the message of the show is to just merely get over the past. I wholeheartedly disagree with this interpretation. I would even argue there's certain moments within the series that outright argue against this claim, including episode 10. This is the episode where Jet reconnects with his former lover, who basically abandoned him. What's interesting about this episode is that Jet does not treat her as a villain, despite doing something kinda horrible to him. Jet's not telling her off in this epic rant. Instead, he just wants an answer for why she did walk out of his life, which she gives to him, citing his overprotective nature that felt smothering, even if he was well-intentioned. By the end of the episode, Jet would throw away the pocket watch of Elisa that he kept with him, which symbolized his ability to finally reconcile with his unfortunate situation. What's interesting about this is that Jet honestly seems to understand Elisa's perspective and grow from his overbearing nature later in the series. Additionally, Ed benefits from embracing her past as well. While Ed is generally in a good mood, her reconnecting with her dad seemed to give her the confidence to embark on her own journey with Ein. I'd also argue that Faye and Spike received closure to a certain extent as well. Faye's closure was the ability to access a VHS tape of her early childhood, which in some sense gave her clarity to who she was before her accident. Even Spike received closure from Julia. She explained to him she couldn't start a new life with Spike because the Syndicate asked her to perform a hit on Spike. Leaving with Spike would probably get them both killed. Another underrated aspect of the show is the subtle progression of characters The Bebop crew goes from a group of roommates that just happen to live together to a genuine friend group. Spike goes from seeing Ein and Ed as burdens to genuinely being heartbroken when they leave the Bebop crew. Faye goes from constantly bickering with Spike to being disheartened at the thought of him throwing his life away to enact vengeance on Vicious and the crime syndicate. This was also a nice contrast to a previous moment when Spike was telling Faye to get over her past.
Easy for you to say, at least you have a past.
And you have a future. That's what counts.
You told me once to forget the past, because it doesn't matter. But you're the one still tied to the past, Spike.
Additionally, Jet, who was somewhat of the group's dad throughout the series, allowed Spike to make his own decision to seek out vengeance for taking the life of Julia. This illustrates that Jet didn't want to make the same mistake that he made with Elisa. Although Cowboy Bebop has a reputation for being a tragedy, and that's somewhat true, I still view it as a hopeful show. A group of misfits lacking a sense of community and barely making ends meet came together to form a bond with each other, even if it was short-lived. But why does this matter? Why am I here talking about this anime from decades ago and this whole concept of weight that people carry with them? Well, as someone in my early 20s, the show heavily resonates with me for a couple reasons. For one, it lets me know that others are in the same boat as me, feeling stuck in the redundant cycle of adulthood without an end in sight and alone in the world. It also discussed the past in a nuanced way. Usually fictional stories will illustrate the past as either extremely traumatic or blinded by nostalgia with rose-tinted glasses. Bebop feels like the most down-to-earth interpretation of the past. The show depicts our past experiences as something that's important for who we are today, but we still have the ability to grow and change. There's also days where life feels monotonous, slow-paced, and as if you're living through filler episodes. I think the main point Bebop is trying to illustrate is that sometimes it feels like your best days are behind you, and that's okay. Most of us are tied down by some sort of baggage or regret from the past that we'd like to change. And instead of just constantly giving us solutions and suggestions on how to fix the problem, Bebop seeks to empathize with the problem instead. It's a show that's understanding without being whiny. For the viewers watching this video, I'm assuming you probably have some sort of weight that you're carrying. Whether that's regret, trauma, abandonment, we all have something. But I just want to say, you're not alone with the weight you carry. I want to tell you this because that's what Bebop was trying to tell me when I watched it. It didn't look down on these struggles or romanticize them, but it just addressed them for what they were. We're all carrying some sort of emotional weight or baggage that we either bury, overcompensate for, or we're trying to escape from. There's days when our lives feel hopeless and like we'll never escape the purgatory of loneliness and despair. I'm not going to tell you I have a solution because I don't. I don't even have one for myself. But just know whenever you're lost at a deep end that I am too. And so is your own Bebop crew that's waiting for you. And maybe suffering isn't so bad if you have someone to share it with. Because life isn't always about overcoming obstacles. Sometimes it's about learning how to live with the scars from your past.